We are very fortunate today that we also have Sri Rajiv Pratap Singh Rudy, Member Parliament, former Minister. His interest in aviation sector and background, that's well known. So we expect him to really set the tone of the seminar today. And before I go over, I'll just give a brief introduction of the PPF and why PPF is getting involved with this sector. We are a non-profit body. We are a political body, but we engage with all subjects that relate to national interest, national security, particularly in the internal arena, because we think and we view that any nation is powerful and stable only if it manages its internal affairs effectively and in a very purposeful manner. We come to the aviation sector because aviation sector has been a shining example of the recent economic boost growth that we have seen in our country. But at the same time, it has been suffering from certain internal problems which related to...
what was the last growth of aviation?
The problems of viability, finance, etc., everything was there. In fact, Indigo, which is the largest private player, has just declared 871 crore loss for the quarter ending 31st March. And estimates are there that they need a cash infusion of 35,000 crore for the next 2 years. So this is the kind of problem that was coming. And the COVID-19 has introduced greater problems in terms of operations. The passenger flow will probably be lesser than before. So all this is there. So we thought of taking this because we are very conscious that like the trains had done it in the colonial era, in the modern era, the affordable option of flying, that is connecting the upwardly mobile young citizens that we have. And that contributes towards the nation building, the ethos of. We have gathered for that purpose some very competent speakers, which moderator Sri Kumar Rajesh will come after me will explain. But we must remember that India simultaneously exists at two extremes of geography, economy. So the question is that we have to, and of course the demography, which has COVID-19 has shown us. So the connectivity of all forms becomes extremely important for the growth of the nation, which then acts as the foundation on which the resilience and sustainability of a nation is built. So from that point of view, we think the crisis of aviation sector is something very, very important to be tackled. I think Kumar Rajesh is still struggling with his connectivity. May I request Honorable Sri Rajiv Pratap Singh Rudy to kindly share his views and inaugurate the webinar on aviation sectors. Sri Rajiv Pratap Singh Rudy.
Khalder, you must tell about question and answer, the telephone numbers.
That would come,
must know.
The telephone number is of Rajesh. So we will come just after the inaugural section. Then at that time, if Rajesh doesn't come, we'll announce that.
No, sorry. The participants will pass on the question to our researchers. So the researchers' number had to be said. Pooja can do that. And then that will be passed on to Rajesh later. Pooja, you can...
Okay. I was thinking of doing that, but later. But in any case, that can be done on chat also. But Pooja, can you share your numbers? So the last time also it was done first on the chat.
Okay, sure, sir. Also, we have an option here, question answer option. You can see your लैपटॉप और कंप्यूटर बोर्ड नीचे पे क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन का ऑप्शन है Q&A, दैट इज फॉर क्वेश्चन आंसर. वो पैनलिस्ट या होस्ट के पास ही आएगा. सो आप लोग ट्राई कर सकते हैं उस पे. और मैं नंबर डाल देती हूँ, अगर SMS या मोबाइल नंबर पे व्हाट्सएप पे भेजना है सो उसके लिए भी. थैंक यू सो मच.
Ms. Rudy, would you please?
Morning, namaskar, and I appreciate PPF has taken this initiative, and there are many more people on different kinds and different orders who are doing this. And I've been asked to give the introductory note. Am I audible? Is it clear? Am I audible?
Yeah, you're very audible. Yeah.
So I go further. तो आज जो हम सब ये सेमिनार वेबिनार पर हैं, इसके पीछे आप सभी लोग जो आज आए हैं, और मैं देख रहा हूँ कपिल कौल साहब अभी नहीं आए, सिंह साहब, RK Singh has joined us, and Air Marshal Ahluwalia is possibly not there yet, but I believe others.
No,
Mr. Ahluwalia is there.
Yeah, that's me. That's me.
Oh, that is okay. Fine, Air Marshal. Nice meeting all of you. Now I have to give an introductory note, and it's where do I start? And that is one, going back into the background, is what is, you see, all of us would be knowing most of these figures. And when we talk about aviation in India, we talk about an aviation which is the third largest market in the world today, after US and China. And the number of aircrafts which are there in the skies before COVID were about 673. We had a domestic traffic of about 140 million, foreign traffic about 70 million. So what has happened in COVID? It's a pause button, and a pause button of its kind, which has never happened in the world ever. And not even during SARS. It never happened like this. But the only comparable thing what has happened in aviation history is SARS. But I'll come to that later. So as far as India is concerned, the civil aviation overall is about the contribution economy is about 72 billion, and revenue loss in India across the world would be around 12 billion US dollar. This is a conservative estimate. The latest could be.
Hi.
For India, it's about the contribution to the GDP would be about 2.5%.
Who is asymptomatic?
Hello. And we have around 9,000.
Ask you that.
We have to switch off the mic, please. Everyone has to unmute.
Is the person who has written the article asymptomatic, or are the people who are reading it?
We have got someone on the, please, if someone could ask someone to close his microphone so that we can carry on.
I think Mr. Gautam Singh. Mr. Gautam Singh.
I think people, I would request everyone to mute Gautam Singh. Mr. Gautam Singh, please mute yourself, because you are on the, and Zoom has a system in which anyone speaks is being. Yeah, thank you very much. And I still find Gautam,
yes.
Again,
But
Gautam is on.
that?
If someone sorts this out, then I'll start again.
Pooja, you mute. Pooja.
That's the unfortunate part. I have not sent my comments and things like that to anyone in clause, except I think to one or two.
Pooja?
Yeah, sure. I'm doing it, sir.
And Chonkar.
Please call him on the mobile phone and tell him that possibly he's doing it for the first time. So,
He's done it. He's
It's
done
done,
it.
sir. It's done, sir.
and everyone is requested that this is a system where a lot of discipline, much more than normal life, is required. So if we hear others, and we can start one by one. So sorry about it, but I got interrupted. So okay, and everyone should be listening to others. That's the idea. So we talked about what is India, and we were talking about 9,500 pilots and about good 20,000 odd crew members. And average growth in India has been about 16% of aviation. Now, what has happened now? Now, post-COVID, is a completely new situation. Prior to this, if you recall, in India, what are the airlines? If we confine ourselves to the airlines in India, is Air India, is Indigo, SpiceJet, Vistara, Go, and Air Asia. These are the airlines which were flying prior to the COVID. And prior to that, we saw Kingfisher going bust a long time back, Deccan vanishing from the scene in last 1 decade. And the latest was Jet Airways. Well, Jet Airways is a completely different story. A beautiful product going down the drains, and it's most pitiful to watch these 777s of Jet Airways still parked in Terminal 3. And that site is actually very gruesome. And as a pilot, when I taxi out from those locations, you see these beautiful aircraft. So aviation, in a way, some airlines have been doing exceptionally well. Some have stopped. But aviation was growing good, and there was a good competition in the market. Now, and to add further, there was a growing demand both for engineers, there was a growing demand for pilots, there was a growing demand for the cabin crew, and it was giving huge employment. And the average number of pilots which were being required in the country was about 1,000 every year, and maximum India can produce on its own about 350, 300 pilots. We can do it through our own commercial training schools, and rest of them are coming from outside. This I'm talking about raw basic CPL holders. But now I think it's completely, and when the government has announced a policy that only 1/3 of the flights can operate, we have a surplus being created. And I don't find Go Airways has come back to operations. I really do not know. Really do not know whether Air Asia has come back to operations, and I only find Vistara, Air India, Indigo, mostly in the air. So that is another issue which we need to. Now you'll have a question that what is happening now? Well, I went through a fact sheet which needs some more authentication, because I may not be very sure, but since most of these figures are cropping up here and there, like Virgin Australia, Thai Airways, South African, and Eurowings have filed for bankruptcy. Going further, in India, there is about 29 lakh jobs which is in India. They are under a lot of stress, and several ground handling agencies have checked out their boys. Going across the world, Finnair has retrenched 2,400 people. Ryanair has grounded 113 planes. 900 pilots have been said thank you. Norwegian Airlines has stopped operations and has returned the latest purchase, which was 787 Dreamliners. SAS has grounded 520 pilots, 14 planes. Etihad has retrenched about 720 staff, and then 10 A380s and 10 787 Dreamliners, which were under order has been stopped. Now you can see the world distress, and that is a very obvious sight that there is a distress in the world. Now, whether such a thing has happened in history is something which we must recall, and whether is something which has. So I was going through some of the notes, and I would like to come in specifically about when it had happened in history and what was the status there. Not many people may have had the time to look back, but I was just going through some of the facts, and all of us must try to recall that a similar thing happened in 2002 and 2002, 2003. And again, this mischief was from China again. And this happened in some unknown kind of pneumonia which struck the world. This was in 2002 November, and this started from South China. And for a very long time, China did not tell the world what it was, and it was called SARS later. So from there, it spread to Hong Kong, Canada, and across the world it went. But that was the time we had the world had just seen the Iraq war. So the oil prices were very high, which fortunately now are the lowest. So this you will have to remember for my concluding remarks, because oil prices were very high. There was a scarcity and things like that. Question was, what shape would the aviation sector be post SARS? And till the time WHO notified it and said that SARS has a world impact, and by April 2003, the world traffic had collapsed, the aviation had collapsed. A point of reference here is I had become the civil aviation minister then in 2001. And the most interesting aspect is that then the DG of CISF was someone none else than Mr. KM Singh, who came to my room, and I still remember as a young, handsome IPS officer heading the CISF. I was a very young, much younger to him, but in his own style, wearing the uniform after a long time from coming out from the IP and coming to CISF. So he came in my room, saluted, and that is a memory which I hold back though. And that was a wonderful memory. And I like to add on to further to Mr. Singh's qualities as an individual that we can do later if we have more time. But I still remember. And 2003 was the year in which I'll come back after SARS, what happened and why I say we still have some glimmer of hope after that. So now what happened during SARS? There was a drop in Thai Airways, reported a drop of traffic by 50%, Dragon Air drop of 77% traffic, Cathay Pacific 77%, even mainline carriers in China, like South China and China East, that dipped to about 40%. Singapore Airlines, for the first time in 2003, posted a loss for the first time in its entire long period, and it recorded the loss which it recorded was about 70% compared to the previous year. So this was post-SARS, all these airlines, what they were witnessing. That point of time, what austerity measures, because I have a long note on it, I would not like, because I have to give I have to complete in about 7 minutes, 30 minutes was the time. Many airlines across the world started dropping its services by almost 1/3. Wages were reduced by about $200 million across the world. And the wage cut was on average 27 to 30%, which most of the airlines are also doing today. Even I do not know about Air India, but Indian Airlines and Spice and so forth and so on, and they are doing. Hotel occupancy had eroded to almost 50%. And APA, which is the Association of Asia Pacific, had cancelled about 1,015 flights. So this was a situation prevailing there. What did some of the governments and airlines do? Now, this is what is very important, which possibly is what the government should plan to do. And I'm sure a career bureaucrat who has become a minister today would have all the knowledge, because these people are well traveled. He has headed the UN, he has been a part of the UN organization. So their brightness cannot be challenged. And I'm sure he would have read the records, and Mr. Puri is a very sharp man. We have a very sharp team of bureaucrats there who would be understanding. I'm not the man, I'm a journalist, so I will be talking about many more things by this evening. So aviation is not my forte at all. I fly planes, I understand few things. And Vajpayee had thought it was good for me to become the civil aviation minister. So that was all. So Taiwan reduced the airport charges then post SARS by 15%. Singapore Airlines and Singapore Airport, Changi, they reduced it by about 30%. Malaysia followed suit, cut charges at Kuala Lumpur, and Hong Kong did the same. And there is a whole slew of measures which were taken by the airlines across the world. Now, I make 2003 SARS, China, impact, I can go back. So someone has to go back and do this research. I have done a lot of research on that. So this was 2003. Now you would say, why after 2003 it was a disaster? That the aviation in India boomed. And I think R.K. Singh, who was then the director in the ministry and still is one of the most knowledgeable person in aviation, is there with us. His aviation field expanded from there, and he's graduated to be one of the most knowledgeable. And of course, retrospectively looking, it was a good decision by RK to come to the ministry and work with me. And I still have notes written by him as a director in the ministry, where he subsequently became the joint secretary further. And then he quit the service, but his knowledge in the field of aviation is always welcome. Now you want to know what happened. Now I told you what happened after SARS. China was the culprit. After that, things collapsed. Aviation was in the worst shape. Today, what happened in 2003 thereafter, what the government of India did. And I would attribute that government of India was in the leadership of Mr. Vajpayee and Jaswant Singh officer. So what did? So most of us, and I will flag these 20 points fast, and then you must remember, the beautiful Delhi and Mumbai airports which you see today was not an idea of which happened later. You saw the construction take place and everything take place post 2004. But this idea of privatizing two brownfield projects, Delhi and Mumbai, was Mr. Vajpayee's dream where I was the minister. And we amended the Airport Authority Act, and the beautiful airports which you see today is a vision which was through an Act of Parliament amendment, which was a vision set then, and which finally, if the Act would not have been amended, then you would have never seen these two big things happening. And at the same time, there was a policy decision for Greenfield projects. And then the two most beautiful airports which came into existence in the country were Greenfield, Shamshabad in Hyderabad and Devanali in Bangalore. So these four decisions were Mr. Vajpayee's decision. Fortunately, I was part of the chair. During that time, we also, when Mr. K. Rai Paul was the secretary, we sanctioned 36 non-metro airports, whether it was Jolly Grant or Jaipur and so forth and so on, and which you saw over the next 5 to 7 years in Praful Patel's time to become what it is. So reforms, anything starts at some point, takes a while. And we convinced Airport Authority to move from steel and cement to steel and glass. And that was the first time Airport Authority was compelled by me to get a 3D designing software so that we can plan airports in India from glass, from cement, concrete to steel, from steel to glass. And that was, so this was on airport side. Coming further, this was the 2003, and please, all of you on record, please put it there that 2003 was that tenure when first time private airlines, and I repeat, private airlines were allowed to fly international. And they were initially, because people had a lot of reservations, Air India had a lot of reservations. Still, Mr. Vajpayee allowed that, and we covered the SAARC nations. And that was the beginning of private airlines going international. So all of us must remember this. Then we further proceeded, and it was Mr. Jaswant Singh. He abolished the Inland Air Travel Tax, IATP. For the first time, ATF, the excise duty was reduced through an executive order, did not go to cabinet or so forth, from 16% to 8%. And ATF excise was reduced then in 2003. And I'm talking about the incentives given to the aviation sector then. Going further, the first time Deccan Airlines and the first low-cost airlines, which you talk about low-cost airlines, but most of us forget the synthesis or the background, how a low-cost airline was started. And when Captain Gopinath, who planned low-cost airlines, the architect of low-cost airlines, Rahul Bhatia and SpiceJet and Ajay Singh and all that came much later. It was Captain Gopinath who was called mad by the ministry and was hated there. He used to come to my office and I said, it's a great idea, let's do it. And when he talked about coupons and that there could be e-tickets, everyone in the ministry laughed. Air India laughed that this man is crazy. How can there be tickets on e-tickets? And they laughed. And today we have e-tickets and so forth and so on. So the first airline which came and beating the challenge with, and when Deccan was to come, the competition came from Jet, Sahara and Air India, Indian Airlines got together to see that this airline is not launched. And it's a true story. They got together and I had to fight that battle. I had to take the wrath of all the organizations who were existing, private and government, to become the most unpopular man to allow private airlines, low-cost airlines to come in this country. Then we further proceeded. We rationalized the landing charges as we saw other countries do it. Then there was many technical decisions taken and Flexi Airspace. Today, the Honorable Prime Minister talked about Flexi Airspace. That means we take certain routes in the air, which is taken over by the Air Force. In 2003, through my own efforts and then the Air Chief, I got released 30% of the airspace. And that now we are talking about airless 17 years down the line, but I was doing it then itself and took 17 years for another government to come back and decide that this has to be done. MROs and so forth and so on. The RVSM airspace, which world had adopted in 2000 C, when your flight path has 2,000 separation, it was from 29,000 feet to 41,000 feet. The separation of airways in air was reduced from 2,000 feet to 1,000 feet, was done in 2003. And this doubled the capacity of airspace. So there were a lot of reforms initiated then. And thereafter, all these 10, 15 years, we saw a quantum jump. Now you say 2003 was the worst. Now 2020 is the worst. Do you find an opportunity? Yes, there is a great opportunity. There is a great possibility, tough times, and we really do not know. So my whole theme is based, and this has, because out of 10 people employed in this formal, informal sector, 2 are in aviation and tourism. Unless aviation picks up, tourism is in a lockdown mode completely. And to revive these 2 sectors is to kickstart the economy. I can keep on speaking on many more issues, penetration, aircraft, how many aircrafts on ground. I have my personal experience. After I complete this show, which would be by 12:30, 12:45, I would be wearing my uniform and operating a flight to Patna because I'm going to Patna today. So thankfully the timing is matched. So I have to be in a political program in my constituency tomorrow for a campaign, which is an individual campaign, and there is no crowd there. So unfortunately, I happen to be the only parliamentarian people say on the globe, I really do not know, who actually flies big planes. And most of the people who still do not know, they think I am in a fancy dress competition when they see me in uniform. They think I've just worn this uniform to be visible. But fortunately, touch wood, I have about 5,000 hours now on an A320 as a senior first officer and captain. So that is me, and I have an interest, but I'm basically a politician. I'm not as bright as the bureaucracy of the nation, or as bright as most of the people who run the airlines. I catch on to ideas and I run Rajesh is there, he's smiling. And history has a lot of things to tell, but wisdom is in the chair. And I always say that wisdom is not outside. If you have the chair, you have the wisdom. And when wisdom is there, people generally don't listen. And so I do not know whether wisdom is appreciated or not, but I don't have the wisdom because the chair and wisdom come together. So thank you, everybody. And this is an opening remark. And Kapil Paul has been in association with me for last 25 years. RK has been there. And Air Marshal would be talking about the airspace rationalization. I do not know. I remember in how I bargained my airspace. There were many compromises. I used to give space across the country to Air Force, and Air Force to release some airspace. It depends on the air chief. And the most interesting part is, Indigo today has about 50% pilots who are from the Air Force. So when they are there in the chair as in the aviation, in the defense ministry or Air Force, they talk completely different. And when they land here, when they fly with us, they have too many complaints why this airspace is like this, why this country is running like this. And I say, when you are there, you have to decide if you think completely different when you come in the private sector. So this wisdom in India between the authority of the armed forces to hold on civilian, not realizing that at the end of the day, everyone is a civilian, including our Marshal Saab who is sitting there. They fail to recall, and even politicians fail to recall, that there is a chair, nothing is permanent, and it is for the future which we have to do. So brighter side, yes, I see a great opportunity post COVID. We need to plan it right. It should not be a knee-jerk reaction. Finances, non-finances, world situation, but I do not see any big things happening in the aviation sector with the present state of affairs for next 2 years. Tough time, but nonetheless, thanks to PPF for holding this seminar and getting me over to make few comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rudy. First of all, my apologies to not only you, but all the panelists and everyone who is on the webinar, primarily because of the technical reason that I could not join. I was there with all of you from 10:30 onwards, but somehow or the other, I just got connected only when Mr. Rudy was on air, as we see it in television parlance. But yes, I was delighted to realize that Mr. Rudy could see me smiling And let me assure you, sir, I was smiling only in terms of approval of every word that you were speaking. क्योंकि अगर आपको बात याद होगी, when you had joined, when Mr. Vajpayee had selected you as a minister, maybe I was the first person who had reached your residence on the Shah Jahan Road across the UPSC building and had taken your tic-tac, as we say, and put you on air, if you remember. So,
no, I know. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll take this opportunity to, first of all, he's such a modest person, Mr. Rudy, that he couldn't actually speak for himself, but he was being modest that he was not an expert, but his entire career spanning from a pilot to a politician to still a pilot, he'll be flying down to Patna today itself. So I'll briefly take a couple of minutes to introduce to all the persons in the webinar about Mr. Rudy, which actually I should have done at the beginning if I would have joined. So, I mean, he needs no introduction, but utilizing this couple of minutes, having commenced his career as a student union representative, Rajiv Tap Rudy is an eminent political leader in India. He has served as the Union Minister of State Independent Charge for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and Minister of State for Parliamentary Affairs in Sri Narendra Modi's government. In Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, about which I was just discussing with you, I had the privilege of being the first television person to talk to him. Captain Rudy was the Minister of State for Commerce and Industry and later the Minister of State with independent charge in civil aviation in 2003. And it's rather a proud privilege for me to tell all and share with the fact that he has come from the grassroots literally, because he was elected as a state legislature in Bihar at the age of barely 27 in 1990s. And as he already said, he is credited with the only parliamentarian on the globe flying Airbus 320 jets, flying with one of the largest airlines in India, figuring in Limca Book of World Records. In fact, I can go on and on and on, but I will not. I'll just stop here and just remind you all about his glorious career. And if I can put it in very briefly, someone who's having such a good experience as a pilot in aviation sector, if I'm talking to the person who has already had 4 times as a Lok Sabha, member of Lok Sabha, twice as a member of Rajya Sabha, naturally, he has immense value to contribute towards the basic aim of this particular webinar. What is the way forward for civil aviation in present pandemic scenario? The crisis can be turned out in an opportunity, and he has spelled out a few methods and ideas about how we can do it. But now the question answer session begins, and the first question coming your way, Mr. Rudy, is: are you satisfied on government decision and activities regarding non-metro airports post initiation of COVID?
I don't follow this question. Non-metro airports, I'm actually, excuse me for not understanding this question. I don't know, I can't make out.
Yeah, actually, I'm also just passing it on. So what I could gather from this question is, there are big airports and small airports. So big airports have already been opened. But what about those smaller non-metro airports? Should the government be more forthcoming in managing it?
You see, these are policy decisions, and government's decision is out of wisdom. And we have to believe that they may have taken decisions because there is possibly some reason. I would not be able to comment on that. I will never say good or bad. I'll never say good or bad. I'm sure those who have taken this decision must have taken a reasoned approach to it. That's all. Next.
So for all the participants, I'd just like to remind all of you about the 2 mobile numbers: 767-8822-0347. I repeat, 767-8822-0347. And second mobile number is 700-700-642-8801. I repeat, 700-642-8801. You can post your questions on these 2 mobile numbers. And our panelists, our esteemed panelists, Mr. Rudy, Mr. Kaul, Mr. R.K. Singh, and Air Marshal Saab Ahluwalia ji, they'll all be more than willing, I'm sure, to answer your questions if you can post them all. So now, as the we have to go by the timing. So, Mr. Rudy, first of all, let me assure you that it was very enlightening. And in fact, even I am getting associated or linked with you across the table after a long, long time. So if there were any questions, I would have passed it on. But just out of curiosity, one question that I would like to ask on behalf of all the people concerned would be, how exactly can we transform this present crisis into an opportunity in aviation sector, especially when, except Indigo maybe, there are hardly any private players who are really capable of standing on their own feet, if we may say so. Mr. Rudy?
There's a very old saying in this, everyone knows that, how you become a millionaire. Ask a billionaire to set up an airline and he'll become a millionaire. So that is true. And I really I will not have an answer what is the way out, but I told you that this is, the recipe cannot be an A or B or C. A recipe has to be, recipe for revival of tourism and aviation has to be a comprehensive one. And I think RK would be the best person because I am an advocate. I can only respond to ideas whether it looks good or bad, but I may not be good at ideas and processes. So, and this should be the wisdom of a leader to realize what is good and what is bad unbiasedly. And that is the political class. So the thought process of how I have told you, the history is there. Post SARS, there is a whole chain of, I have a whole document which I had written. So if I look into the document, it was a revival in 2003 and a fantastic revival, and by the government and then across the world also. So today is to look back to the document, which is the rarest of rare document. And this document is dated 11th July at fax. There was a fax and there was no email. So the fax says 11th July 2003, 1754. And Air India Bombay MD's office. And when I'd asked for a note, this note came to me. And that was sent to Pratyay Amrit. Pratyay Amrit is the Principal Commissioner at Relief and Power in Government of Bihar. So I have a document 17 years old, writing with all my slips and hand notes on it. And if this document should be the vision document and many more to add how an economy or how aviation economy revived itself. So let's stop there.
Great. So at least you gave one concrete answer with proper details. You have quoted a particular document, and I'm sure when we are looking forward to the way forward kind of a thing out of this crisis, especially in terms of aviation sector, that particular document, I'm sure, would be of immense value. So thank you, Mr. Rudy, for having shared your ideas on the topic that we had requested you to, present state of Indian aviation, opportunities and challenges ahead. And I'm delighted to share with everyone that. Well, don't worry, Mr. Rudy. We are doing the recording, and we'll share the recording with you for your staff to take care of it. Yeah, yeah. So thank you very much, and I'm delighted also to share that the rest of the 3 panelists, experts for the day, Shri Kapil Kaul, Shri R.K. Singh, and Air Marshal retired APS Ahluwalia, they're all there, ready for their own expert opinion for us to share with. So while I'm thanking Mr. Rudy for his precious time and also views about whatever he has shared, I'm sure they'll be precious enough for the PPF in order to formulate the future directions that we would suggest, the PPF would suggest for the aviation sector. But while thanking Mr. Rudy, it's also my privilege to welcome Shri Kapil Kaul, the CEO of CAPA India, and Mr. Kaul will be talking about sustainability of Indian aviation, expectations from the government. But before I invite him to share his views, very briefly, again, my apologies to Mr. Rudy that I was not there to introduce you, so I talked about you whenever I could. But because I'm here, let me just spare a while introducing and telling all viewers about Mr. Kapil Kaul. Mr. Kapil Kaul is the CEO and director of CAPA South Asia, which he established in April 2003. Remember, 2003 is churning out to be a very crucial year. Mr. Rudy was reminding us about how crucial 2003 was for the turned around of the aviation sector. And this was another example. In April 2003, Mr. Kapil Kaul had started this particular CAPA. In the last 17 years, Mr. Kapil has led closer to 200 consulting and research projects for over 120 Indian and global clients and across the aviation value chain. Recent projects include airport bid and advisory strategy plan for a leading airport operator, ground handling advisory, airline transformation and restructuring of a leading African airline network, planning for a national airline based in South Asia. And prior to CAPA, Kapil had worked with leading airline and hospitality brands in leadership roles. So on this particular topic, I'll just repeat the topic on which Mr. Kapil Kaul will be speaking: sustainability of Indian aviation, expectations from the government. So over to you, Mr. Kaul.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. And I was delighted to hear Mr. Rudy speak. Our company started in India during Mr. Rudy's time. And that was a fascinating 5-8 months of his tenure, which I will share it during the part of my comments. But thank you for inviting me. I think sustainability has never been talked about, for Indian aviation. We talk everything else, but we have not looked at how the airline industry and aviation industry or the entire value chain can be sustainable. Because we have never possibly been serious about creating a sustainable industry. In the last 30 years, now we are about 30 years of deregulation. We started in 91, 92. In the last 30 years, there has been many attempts to relook at this sector in a very strategic manner. But unfortunately, it was not followed through, or it had execution issues. And I will cite some key examples where we thought that a sustainable and profitable industry from a policy structure was attempted. First started in 2003, late part of NDA's first NDA regime, whereby the government in the very last months of their tenure decided to take major initiatives. One initiative they took was on the cost side, that they abolished this archaic inland travel tax, reduced excise duty on fuel, allowed international airlines to, Indian domestic carriers to fly international, initially to SAARC countries. And they had an airport privatization program. Air India's privatization itself almost got through during that period, except for the last minute challenges that it faced. It was almost certain that Air India's privatization would have happened in 2003 during the NDA regime. So that time in 2003, Naresh Chandra committee was instituted, and that committee mandate was to create a strategic roadmap to build a sustainable aviation industry going forward. In my experience, that was the best piece of strategic thinking that I have seen from a policy roadmap perspective. It was very comprehensive, covered every aspect of aviation value chain, and it was forward thinking as well. It had clearly set up a direction which needed to be executed. Unfortunately, the NDA government didn't return back. The UPA government came into power. Expectations from a UPA government at that point of time, given the structure of the UPA one itself, but there was a lot of left parties and things like that. The expectation was that this brilliant piece of roadmap will remain a roadmap. It will remain on paper. It will not see the light of the day. But during the UPA 1, 2004 to 2008, most of the initiatives that were suggested in the Naresh Chandra committee report were executed to the highest level that I have seen in the last 17 years. I'm not talking about beyond 2008, because that was a dismal story. But 04 to 08, Naresh Chandra committee roadmap, if not fully, but partially, was implemented with highest executional efficiency. You saw, the LCC's Gopinath's license Mr. Rudy gave during his tenure. That became a game changer. But from 2004 to 2008, there was a genuine deregulation. Licenses were approved. It was not difficult to get licenses. LCCs were promoted. Airport privatization was executed, not only Hyderabad and Bangalore, but you also had Delhi-Bombay privatization taking shape. Air India's massive fleet order was given. There were MROs initiated, discussions around flexible use of airspace. So almost everything that Naresh Chandra committee report had suggested, some of it, if not all of it, was executed. And we saw from 2003, maybe the last 7-8 months of the 2000 NDA regime, plus the first 4 years of the UPA1, where I call it a very dramatic changes in the aviation landscape. But unfortunately, it remained an exercise limited for 5 years, because post 2008 onwards, I think the airline industry and aviation industry came to a grinding halt in terms of policy initiatives, in terms of innovation, in terms of desire to create a sustainable industry. We did see from 2008 very ad hoc incremental measures up to 2015. But overall, the period from 2018 right up to 2014-15 was almost a forgettable period. And we lost a golden opportunity from creating and building on what was initiated in 2003, what was executed in 2004 to 8, but we lost that momentum completely and went into a very reverse gear from 2008 onwards, right up to 14-15. So in the period of last 30 years, there were 2 attempts made to really create a sustainable roadmap. That was 2003, later part of 2003, and 2004 and 8. After that, as I said, it almost reversed. Then came 2015. 2015 finally saw an aviation policy. Because if you have to generate investment, if you have to attract billions and billions of dollars of investment, you need a policy framework which an investor can rely on. We didn't have, right from 1990 to 2015, for 25 years, we had a sector which dramatically changed in size, scale, and structure. But we didn't have a policy framework which was cabinet approved. So 2015, the National Civil Aviation Policy that was released was the first formal document of a policy which covered almost every aspect of aviation. So there were these three brief pockets in the last 30 years, 2003, 2004 and 8, and some period of 2015 where the National Civil Aviation Policy was drafted. But in all these years, right from 1990 up to 2020, in these 30 years, the core issues have always been unaddressed. The only time, as I said, where a roadmap was created, which was forward-looking, well integrated, both in upstream and downstream businesses of aviation, was the Naresh Chandra committee report. But after that, we didn't see a roadmap. So the institutional infrastructure that governs a sustainable aviation industry has always been missing. Now, what is this institutional infrastructure? And why is this institutional infrastructure so critical for a sustainable aviation? I'll explain. Institutional infrastructure primarily means a policy making, regulatory infrastructure, policy making infrastructure, skill infrastructure, redesigning the physical regime aligned to the needs of the sector. All of that has been partially addressed, but as the airlines modernize, aviation takes dramatic steps for change in terms of technology. We have not addressed this institutional infrastructure. The policy making that was initiated in NCAP in 2015 was a very good initiative, but perhaps it was not as complete as it should have been, as complete as the industry wanted. It had certain fault lines. Those fault lines were unfortunately not addressed in the later years. So the policy document at NCAP is still to give results because of its fault lines. So overall, if you don't build an institutional infrastructure, let's look at the examples of what this institutional infrastructure could be. Let's say the role of Director General of Civil Aviation. I have been in many committees right from 2003, where the Independent Civil Aviation Authority of India on lines with CAA UK was to be established, which will give way for a professional, independent, expert structured regulator. That has never seen the light of the day. And having an independent regulatory authority for such a large aviation market, which is going to grow for 3 to 4 decades, is a vital part of this institutional infrastructure. So you need to redesign, when you need to build this institutional infrastructure, you have to redesign the Director General Civil Aviation into an expert-driven, modern, well-structured, board-driven, and independent, I underline the word, independent regulatory framework. Similarly, you look at other critical institution called BCAS. Very, very critical given the security threat that keeps increasing, especially in India. That how do you make a very technology-oriented, modern security regime for aviation in India on lines with what TSA in the United States are or in other countries? It is technology-driven and not manpower-driven. And the whole roadmap for a new BCAS had to be constructed. It was discussed many times, but that is still left unattended. Now, if you look at the cost of these regulations, and we have tried to model that the archaic organizations that we have never attempted to dismantle, which is largely DGCA, BCAS, and other regulatory institutions, result in almost 10 to 18% cost to the industry, which the industry never realizes. We will be sharing shortly the impact of these archaic regulations from the aviation cost perspective to the industry soon. There are other elements of the institutional infrastructure, skill development, especially the technical skill development. You need to have capacity building at the ministry itself. If you have to be an industry to attract a $250 billion investment over 10 to 15 years, the capacity building at the ministry has to be at strategic levels. And there are other elements of this institutional infrastructure, whether with respect to cost, whether with respect to charges regime, that needs to be addressed in totality. If you don't build that institutional infrastructure and align it to the needs of the industry, sustainability will be a byproduct of lower fuel prices. Because as an industry, whenever we have lower fuel prices, the industry seems to be in a good state. But otherwise, fundamentally, it will continue to be weak without having this institutional infrastructure in place. Now, there are two elements of the institutional infrastructure that I like to talk, which is very critical to create a sustainable airline industry, which will become thereby the pivot around which a sustainable aviation industry can be created. Now let's look at the current situation. And I will talk prior to COVID, because COVID is a different ballgame, and I'll cover that later. But prior to COVID, the entire airline industry, except one carrier, was technically bankrupt. Now, it happens only in India that a technically bankrupt airline is expanding, and expanding to a level that we haven't seen. In overseas, to maintain your AOP, you will have to have 3 or 6 months of cash without your revenues, without any revenue being counted. So if we look at the pre-COVID environment based on FY20 data, the industry required $4 billion of cash on a 3-month basis, on a 3-month cash position. And they had roughly about potentially $1.75 billion. So there was a gap of over $2 billion in terms of maintaining a cash position, which is critical for maintaining your AOP. Now, if you have an industry, airline industry, which is technically bankrupt, the whole aviation value system is dependent on a technically bankrupt industry. So how are we allowing airlines which have no cash to operate, what kind of a policy structure is this that the impact of a technically bankrupt industry is never counted, it's not even looked at, it's not even addressed. So till we don't address this issue, whereby we allow airlines to say, and as a policy direction, a written policy direction, that you need a 3 months of cash minimum to be maintaining an AOP. There have been examples overseas, and I'll cite 2 of them to give an instance that why having this 3 to 6 months of cash is important. Virgin Blue, which went into voluntary bankruptcy post-COVID, had about $900 million of cash. But before the regulator could have acted post-COVID, they voluntarily went into bankruptcy. But they had $900 million of cash. There was Monarch Airlines in UK, whose license was suspended because they didn't have the requisite cash to maintain an operation. The regulator acted. They tried to get an investment. That investment was not sufficient. The airline had to close. But that cash they had for 3 months plus or 6 months was enough to pay employees as per their employee contract, was enough to pay your airport authority dues or any other dues. There was only an issue with respect to lessors because you have to pay for the entire termination. You have to pay for the entire lease term. Similarly, when we talk about a startup airline in India, and I do advisory, we have done 200 consulting in the last 17 years, 700 globally. We come up with companies promoters which want to put 10 crores, 15 crores and start up an airline. It takes $7 million to start an airline in India. While globally, there is no condition for a paid up capital. The only condition is your business plan and whether you have cash to run it for 6 months without any revenue coming. So the whole infrastructure, institutional infrastructure, policy-making infrastructure, is my assessment not aligned to creating this stable industry. And I would like to add one more thing we have today, or what we're going to have in the future, must have clear economic goals. What is the aviation's direct, indirect, and catalytic contribution to aviation over the next 5 to 10 years? How will it contribute to the Prime Minister's ambitious 5 trillion economy? How will it attract $250 to $300 billion of investment? How many direct, indirect jobs it wants to create? Not only jobs, but high earning jobs. Our policy making doesn't have these goals. We just have one number that we will become the 3rd largest market. But how do we become this 3rd largest market without having institutional capabilities to be able to reach that number? Because we have been so far celebrating a profitless growth. So the Prime Minister's inspirational address the other day to create structural reforms, to create quantum leap in our reforms. In aviation, it must start by giving the institutional infrastructure that you require to be able to give the industry the kind of platform to grow. So it's up to the ministry to take a clue from what the Honorable Prime Minister said, to redraw, redesign, rethink aviation, and create a sustainable roadmap. Now, when you look at the pitiable condition of the airline industry in India, or aviation industry in India, it's not just the policy making that is impacted, or the regulatory, or the high fiscal regime that is impacted. That's one part of the story. When you look at the airlines themselves, undercapitalization has been a problem with industry for the last 30 years. They don't have sufficient capital structure to maintain the operations. There are corporate governance issues, significant corporate governance issues. I mean, though we are a commercial company, but I am very pained to say that the debacle of Jet Airways has reflected the kind of leakages that we see coming in the newspaper reports, the kind of leakages and institutional wreck it was from a corporate governance perspective. That I believe that if the corporate governance was of the standard that we aspire to be for our employees, for our shareholders, for our aviation community and for our economy, jet would not have closed. So there is industry themselves to be responsible for the state of the industry. If we improve corporate governance, if we have a tight leash on cost, if there are no leakages, if we employ the right people, if we ensure that the intellectual capital at the board and management level is strong, I think in spite of the policy, regulatory and fiscal issues, the airline industry would have been much better. So before I close, I'd like to say that India's aspiration to be a 5 trillion economy, our Honorable Prime Minister's vision must be supported by a robust connectivity regime, not only for passengers, but for cargo and express, connecting India to the rest of the world in the most seamless manner, in a more profitable manner, in a sustainable manner. That requires both the industry to fix the loopholes that currently exist and for the government to provide the institutional infrastructure that is required for this industry to grow. In terms of, lastly, I forgot to add in the institutional infrastructure. One of the key things that I keep seeing, and I have always highlighted this, that the capacity building at the industry, at the ministry, has to be very, very high. You have to be set up to succeed. The outcome of lack of that capacity building is that you have the aircrafts being inducted pre-COVID, and suddenly we realize that we need 400 parking bays. We need thousands of pilots to induct. So from a capacity planning perspective, when we know that these aircrafts are being inducted, why are we building bridges at the last moment? I mean, if we have these order book that's coming, we see Indigo expanding and other airlines expanding, whether it is pilots, whether it is engineers, whether it is parking bays, whether it's terminal infrastructure, it's a last minute issue. So I think I like to close by saying that the roadmap for building a sustainable aviation is a very critical part of India's economic mission. You cannot have a 5 trillion economy without a sustainable aviation industry. My request to the industry and the government is that a collaboration post-COVID, which is to redesign and rethink aviation in a very holistic manner, in a manner that was done in 2003 with Naresh Chandra committee report, a similar committee with an expert body set up to create this roadmap and have that executional efficiency which we saw in 2004 to 8, or that drive that we saw in 2015 when the new NCAP policy was incorporated. So as long as we take COVID as an example, as an opportunity to redraw, rethink, and redesign aviation, I think over a period of time, 3 to 5 years, aviation industry will play a critical role, not only in the economic, but in the socio-economic development of the country. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Mr. Rudy covered almost everything that had to be said. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take. But for becoming very serious of aviation, we haven't seen in the last 30 years. We need to be serious about aviation. Once we are serious about aviation, rest of it will become a byproduct. So that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Kaul. And it was really, as they say, from the horse's mouth, because you have been through it, given over 200 advisories in the last 17 years. So actually what you were saying was with your own experiences, and I'm sure it will be quite useful, very useful. So as you also suggested and asked our people to put in their questions, so I'll be waiting. More the questions that come our way, I'll be putting forward to them, to you. But meanwhile, even as I'm waiting for the questions to be asked to you, let me check if Mr. Rudy has joined back. I have seen him. I can see him visually. His visual is there. Can you hear me, Mr. Rudy?
I was listening to, occasionally I'm so used to this conference, so we keep doing some work.
Okay.
So I was listening, I was not aware.
No problem at all. And I'm happy that you joined us, because even as the questions have started.
Again, I did not leave you. I was just on mode hearing you.
Okay, then let me correct that you joined us visually. Now is it okay? Okay, so now that we are having you both audio and visual, before I start reading out the questions to Mr. Call, there is one question that had come your way, Mr. Rudy. So I'll just finish that up and then I'll come to Mr. Call. Is it okay, Mr. Rudy?
Yeah.
So the question to Mr. Rudy is from Mr. Sanjay Sinha, a GC member of PPF. And I am reading out the question, sir, Mr. Rudy. India is the third largest civil aviation market in the world. It is a thriving sector. According to Vision 2040, I guess it is 2040, of MOCA, which I understand is Ministry of Civil Aviation. The requirement of civil aviation aircrafts, rather civilian aircrafts, is likely to go up to over 2,300, the question says. Why? Now I think the question part. What is it, rather, why is it that no serious effort seems to have been made to manufacture commercial aircraft indigenously? Brazil produces Embraers, Canada Bombardiers, and even late starters like China has marketed a 168-seater aircraft. And we, in India, is still experimenting with a 19-seater Saras. So that is the question, Mr. Rudy.
Because India today is the second, you just understand it's a slightly satire. India is the second largest manufacturer of mobile phones in the world. But we do not do any manufacturing. What government and the government defines mobile phones as manufacturing is basically assembly. So a government does not actually, and all the governments and presidency sitting here cannot define between assembly and manufacturing. So if the thought process of the system that, which has been there for 65 years, very difficult question. And I also know these are many, very important questions. And well, all the figures of how much which you require is to be revised now post-COVID. So what do not protection. So that is, but indigenous building, you have to, I need a different session for that. I cannot explain it in 2 lines. I have to come back with 20 references which will explain that we are a nation of ordinary.
Okay.
We are a nation of ordinary, and we count ordinariness in a way that we run the world because we have a huge population. When you talk about ordinary, then I don't want to get into this, and you'll have to explain.
No, I can understand your point. So as a supplementary, supplementary question.
One more question. In this election, I was going around Delhi, 6 kilometers from route. Delhi is a slum worse than Chhapra in Bihar or Muzaffarpur or anywhere in the world. Worst slum exists in Delhi, 8 kilometers away from Delhi. You have to visit these places, and I first realized that why people come and stay in this slum. So Luton's Delhi has been witnessed for 100 years. No one in this country could even innovate to chhod dijiye. Luton's Delhi replicate bhi koi nahi kar paya Bharat mein. They don't even know how roads are made and greenery has to be kept. So we are leave apart innovating. We are poor at duplicating. So
जी तो आपकी भावनाओं
चर्चा करने की जरूरत नहीं है.
जी मैं आपकी भावनाओं को अच्छी तरह समझ रहा हूं और आप खुद अपने अनुभव से ये बता रहे हैं. You as a person who is with meeting people day in and day and night. So we appreciate that, and we really take your suggestion in a very positive manner that PPF may actually have another webinar or seminar if the lockdown opens on this particular topic separately. So thank you very much for your thoughts, Mr. Rudy. Now the question coming your way, Mr. Call. And I always reiterate, because this is not the first time that I am hosting this PPF conference, that all the guests, all our experts are so active that they also participate and listen very intently about the other experts speaking, which is very positive and good for the future. So this question comes from the expert who will be sharing his view next, Mr. R.K. Singh. And his question to Kapil is, are you there, Mr. Kapil?
Yes, yes, I am. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So the question is addressed to you from Mr. R.K. Singh. When you say because of regulations, costs go up by 10% to 18%. Can you identify those regulations, please, Kapil?
So I think broader element of that cost is that there is a overarching control of the government in a deregulated industry. The time, and I will talk about the senior management and board time to manage the environment, whether it is at the ministry or beyond aviation ministry, which I must say that has come down significantly in the last 6 years. Because one of the greatest achievements of this government is to restore institutional integrity. At least I can talk about the aviation ministry, bring in transparency, which from 2012 we saw that there were serious institutional integrity issues. But from 14 onwards, that transparency and institutional integrity of the aviation was rebuilt completely. But what I meant is that the time first, the senior management time at the board, CEO, and other top CXO level, the amount of time they spend in dealing, number one, I'll take one instance first, of dealing with the ministry, dealing with the Director General of Civil Aviation, dealing with what you call the Bureau of Civil Aviation Securities. The time that it is consumed to deal with these three organizations, because of the fact that in spite of a deregulated environment, we continue to have a very serious government influence, and we are, let's say, undermanaged in that sense. So the time spent in, and what are this time spent on? I will give you an example and why does it cost so much. Now, when Jet Airways collapsed, there was this battle for slots in Mumbai that the government actually said to these airlines, whichever airline has taken these slots, that you cannot take the capacity out from other markets. You will have to bring in new aircraft to take care of the slots in Bombay. Now, this is possibly the first regime that will instruct the airlines to say that, listen, I will take my capacity off from some other loss-making markets and I will take them to Bombay without having to incur the cost of including getting new planes. Now, what has happened? The airlines got in 50 of these jet planes, and the resultant benefits of a jet's impact on the airlines was lost because that capacity in the domestic came very quickly, and it overburdened at least one airline significantly, with the result that they were financially weak. Let's talk about other instance of the cost, and if I built it in monetary terms, it will be significant. How was the slot, the bilaterals allocated of jet? To the best of my knowledge, it was done on auction basis. How was that done, and which country would do the bilaterals within airlines to an auction? How does bilateral as a policy get given to different airlines? In other countries, it is given with the itself of those countries on economic value add framework, that which airline will add more value to the economy. We don't have those frameworks, but we come up with these ad hoc inputs. For example, you can't take the capacity off from this market to place it in markets where you can. That flexibility is not there. So second, do bilaterals on an ad hoc basis because I don't have an economic value EVA framework to allocate bilaterals. When I look at DGCA, the archaic rules that DGCA has, that one of the other important statements that the minister, Mr. Raju, made is that we are overburdened with rules and conditions. We need to dismantle these rules. Some of them are not aligned to the needs of the industry. Now, when the rules are very archaic, industry has to work within those rules. Time spent by executives to deal with those rules is really massive. So there are many instances like that.
I can understand. Mr. R.K. Singh had asked you to name a couple of, identify a few regulations which would increase the cost by say 10 to 18%. So I'm sure you have enumerated quite a few. So is it okay, Mr. Singh? Are you there?
It's okay. I don't want him to name those specific regulations. It is fine if those some could be identified, because it will help us then take up the matter at an appropriate level. That's all. So my question was very general in nature. I don't want him to mention those.
Okay.
That's fine.
That is the reason why I just checked out with both the person who asked the question and Mr. Kaul. Okay. So thank you very much, Kapil. Thank you very much, Mr. Kaul, for having shared your views. And I'm sure it will lead to some kind of a concrete way that PPF is looking at in terms of formulating the way forward for civil aviation industry in context of the present pandemic. And now, as moving on to the next expert, he is absolutely among the most well-versed persons in the aviation industry. And yet, it is my privilege to present before you Mr. R.K. Singh, to all the persons who have joined the webinar, and it will take barely a minute or so. Mr. R.K. Singh is the founder of RKS Associates, a consulting firm in the area of aviation regulation. He serves on board of CSTPL, a joint venture company between India and Canadian entity involved in airline simulation training, and also serves as on the International Advisory Board of Institute of Aviation and Space Law, IASL, of Leiden University, the Netherlands, and AeroHelp Institute of Aviation Law, Russia. He is invited to speak at various domestic and international conferences on topical subjects relating to public aviation law. And this is one of the examples where PPF has invited him. Prior to setting up his RKS Associates, Mr. Singh worked in various capacities in central and state governments as an officer, which we say as an IAS officer, Indian Administrative Officer in India. He served as a director and a joint secretary in the Ministry of Civil Aviation, and also on the boards of Air India and Indian Airlines, and as chairman and MD, managing director of Pawan Hans Helicopters, all government-owned companies. Mr. Singh is an alumnus of Hindu College, Delhi University. He is also an MBA from Southern Cross University, Australia, and LLM in Aviation and Space Law. And it is very rare and distinctive degree that he holds. LLM in Aviation and Space Law from Leiden University, the Netherlands. So it is my proud privilege to introduce you to the webinar, Mr. R.K. Singh. And also, it is my good fortune to have known him personally as well. So over to you, Mr. Singh. Can you hear me? Are you, can you hear me, Mr. Singh? Hello? Let me just see.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rajesh. Thanks for this introduction.
And for the benefit of everyone else, Mr. Singh, I'll just repeat the topic on which we have invited you to speak. It is, Mr. Singh is going to speak to us on global competitiveness of Indian aviation, a roadmap. Over to you, Mr. R.K. Singh.
I have a small presentation which I'm just going to upload. So give me just a minute, yeah.
Sure, no problem.
Unfortunately, there is some technical glitch. I am unable to upload it, but let me see. I'll try once again.
No problem, sir. Okay. We have the patience, and for this, we have also made you the host. So you can, the entire webinar, the page is at your disposal, sir. There are many things that we have been learning during this pandemic, the lockdown, and I'm sure one of the virtues that we are all learning is patience. हमें धैर्य की बहुत कमी होती जा रही थी हमारे जिंदगी में, आपाधापी की दुनिया में. So once when you are locked down at our residence, this is another of those human virtues that we have been forced to accept, and that is what it is, Mr. Singh. हम धैर्यपूर्वक प्रतीक्षा करेंगे.
No, there is some problem.
अच्छा, then we'll have to make do with the audio.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
Pooja, can you help?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah, the share screen, I'm not getting the presentation. That is the difficulty, that's all.
Pooja, can you share the screen to Mr. Singh so that he can manage it himself?
I have to share.
Yeah, sure, sir.
This is the one second.
Ah. Yes, sir, we got you.
So can you see the screen now? Is it visible?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is visible to all, and it
Yeah,
always
thank you so
helps.
much. Sorry to have kept you waiting. But, you know,
Absolutely not, sir. Absolutely not. It's our pleasure.
I will begin by, you know, just saying a few words about this panel. I am so delighted to be part of this panel with Mr. Rudy, because my interest in civil aviation, you know, actually got kindled because of Mr. Rudy. When he became minister in year 2003, he got me as director, and he took personal interest and he got me as a director in the ministry. Later, when he left, I carried on, became joint secretary, and then I left the ministry in 2009 as joint secretary. And I must say that by that time, my interest in civil aviation was so profound that I went on to leave the IAS and have continued to work in the civil aviation field, went on to do my LLM in Masters in Aviation Law, and since then I have been working in this field. So that's a small introduction. As far as Mr. Rudy is concerned, you know, I'm really delighted to be part of the same panel. Kapil is very well known. We have spoken together at International Forum in the past, and he is one of the great thinking minds when it comes to the aviation. And Air Marshal Ahluwalia is an old colleague. We have worked together when I was in the Ministry of Defense and he was in the Air Force headquarters. So we have sort of all amongst the people, we know very well each other. So it's a very nice panel to be in, and I'm thankful to PPF to give me this opportunity. Now I will begin by just presenting the scenario, which has been mentioned many a times, that, you know, the India is actually the third largest. Yes, India is the third largest domestic market. But when we put all things together, this is the way it is moving. That, you know, India from 7th position, how it jumped Germany and then overtaken Japan, and gradually overtaking and will finally overtake UK, and will become the third largest, definitely the third largest market overall in terms of international and domestic both. The present scenario, as we see, is that India's domestic growth is very, very impressive. It has grown by almost 17%, 16.8% CAGR over the last 15 years or so. But same is not true of international. International has not been growing so rapidly. And the topic which is assigned to me, which is about global competitiveness, I am going to focus more on the international side. And the net result is that our reliance on foreign carriers to provide the connectivity still remains very high. Almost 65% or maybe 62% of all international numbers is carried by the foreign carriers. We do about 35 to 38%. And in terms of revenue, the gap becomes even wider because the foreign airlines, they are predominantly doing these the carriage to USA, UK, the Europe and Japan and so on and so forth. So their revenue potential becomes larger. Our maximum focus, maximum growth actually is in the regional international, which is the West Asia on one end, and you can say going up to Singapore or Hong Kong on the other side. Barring Air India, Jet Airways could not sustain, and barring Air India, we do not really have a long-haul carrier, so there is a over-dependence on the foreign carrier. The Indian carriers, as we have seen, they have been unable to compete with the foreign hub carriers. This is something which is very well known, and what happens is that it results into collapse. Because Jet Airways, as Mr. Rudy also underlined, it was a great product, great airline, but where things started going wrong is that the intense competition on the cost side in the domestic, which it could not withstand. And on the other hand, when it went international, it had to compete with the big guys, and suddenly you are exposed and you realize how undercapitalized you are. Kingfisher, it is well known. Woes of Air India are fairly well known. If it was not for the government, it was not a government airline, this airline would have folded because of its losses much long ago. Now, what this actually brings me to the scenario that because of this dependence, what has happened is that there are many hubs, and these hubs have all emerged around India, and not only in India, but I would say that whole of South Asia contributes quite a lot to the numbers that you carry. That you see in terms of India, whilst our population base is so high, their total passenger throughput is so low, in comparison, as you can see. When we go to Singapore, Doha, Dubai, Hong Kong, you can clearly see two are on the west side of India, Singapore and Hong Kong. Two on the east I have underlined. There are others as well. You will suddenly see that compared to their population size, the amount of the number of passengers that they carry is so amazingly high. In case of Dubai, you can see it is almost 27 times more than their own population size is the number of people getting carried. And so the economic impact of something like this can very well be imagined. Now, in terms of sheer opportunity, see, I will just sort of underline 3 or 4 things, in terms of opportunity. The first one, I would say that geographically, India sits pretty well. In fact, recently I was speaking in Hong Kong in October in some conference, and I was pleasantly surprised that the main speaker there, he underlined the fact that India actually has to get its act together, because all the ingredients exist for India to have a great world airline. So number one is that the geography, because when the traffic has to be transferred from one end of the world to the other end of the world, it is important to have the right geography. Like for instance, Australia can never be a destination for transfer traffic. Latin America cannot be a destination for transfer traffic. But yes, the India or the West Asia, Middle East, these are sitting almost in the middle of the world, so can provide that kind of a bridge between East and West. The second thing is that the population base. India's own population base, 1.3 billion, and the spread, 25 million people of Indian origin spread globally. You can see the numbers. So that's a fairly good spread, starting from Canada, United States, going all the way to Australia and in between. So Indian diaspora is a fairly big number. And these two are the essential drivers. One is your own population base. The other driver is that how many people of your diaspora are living out of India. On both counts, India is a fairly impressive number, and there should be a great airline, connecting. On top of that, when we talk of 1.3 billion population, let's also not forget that India's own geography. We have so many cities with 1 million population and having their own airport. So So there is a clear case that a strong hub airline should emerge in India, and out of Delhi or Bombay, with all the feeder from the India's domestic points, as also from South Asian points, as also from Southeast Asian points. In terms of tourism potential, which is a big driver, I would say, for the aviation, as is well known that 97% of the overseas Indian travelers, they arrive by air. So again, there is the same huge opportunity. Now the problem again is that despite having all we have the Himalayas, we have the heritage, we have the the medical care, healthcare, and despite this Ayurveda and all that, so I just call it the 3 H's. If despite these 3 H's, we rank 34th in tourist arrivals. It is even lower than a casino city Macau. So 1C, scores over 3 H's. That is where we are right now. And there is a tremendous scope of growth there. There is no doubt about it. If we can get still, as we all know, there is a long way to go. Now, coming to when we talk of opportunity, India has a fairly robust bilateral framework of agreements with the foreign countries in order to enable its airline to actually operate. We have open sky agreements with major markets like US, UK, Australia, and the number only adds. So that provides, and we have certain unique opportunities. In fact, when I was discussing some of these unique opportunities, like an Indian carrier can go to USA or Australia through Hong Kong with traffic rights. Indian carrier could go to China, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand through Thailand with traffic rights. You can pick traffic from an airport like Bangkok. India could pick traffic, an Indian carrier could pick traffic from Dubai, go to Europe, Africa, Mid East, US, anywhere. India, UK, USA, it's an open sky. So Indian carrier can go to UK, pick traffic, go to USA. So these are some of the unique opportunities. So when I was discussing this with one of the CEOs of a domestic airline, is a foreign CEO, and he was commenting that actually India is sitting on a gold mine. These kind of traffic rights are not available to many countries. So when I look back and to my days in the Ministry of Civil Aviation, I wonder that why with so much ease these foreign nations agreed to actually give fifth freedom, we call it technically fifth freedom traffic rights. I think it is probably because they always felt that Indian carriers will never be able to capitalize on this opportunity, because Air India was the principal carrier at that time. Its weaknesses were known. So possibly that, and it continues, still there are no takers for these opportunities. That is where we are. Now, when so much of opportunity does exist, why is it that we do not have a globally competitive product? We do not really have a globally competitive product. There are efforts made and these efforts collapsed. So historically, I would say that the over-reliance on public sector, and public sector airline had its own challenges. Always the fleet inadequacy, the costs have always been high on a per unit basis. Lack of serious professionalism, and I can substantiate that. It is a matter of detail. The general policy of the government towards a public sector, that is something which also impairs and impedes the growth. And these are all very well known what I'm talking about. So and on the private side when we go, and Kapil did mention about it, on the private side when we go, we find that the airlines have been grossly undercapitalized. Even though they went for international like Jet Airways or for some time Kingfisher, so their focus or emphasis that was purely on connecting where Indian diaspora or some Indian traffic is there. It was never towards building a robust network. So it was, I would say, a fairly poor attempt. It was not a very robust attempt. It was more targeted for carrying the same kind of a traffic which Air India was doing. Beyond that, we did not see, because they were undercapitalized. They had their own constraint. The airport infrastructure in India was something we all know that for long, it did not offer an opportunity for a sort of a transfer traffic airport. Things improved. Things have improved. We have the Delhi airport, which is a shining star. It's a good example. Bombay airport. But having said so, the inadequacy of infrastructure is yet again to be noticed. I remember when these airports were being negotiated and the plan, there was so much opposition from some members in the planning commission saying that, this is too grand a design, this is too big a airport, do we really need it, and so on. And you have seen how the aviation grows, and today even Delhi airport, it's a challenge to get a slot and a decent parking place. Bombay is of course completely saturated. So we have the inadequacy of infrastructure has always been an issue. The adverse cost structure. When I talk of adverse cost structure, I'm talking of a major component which is the fuel cost, and in the next slide I'll come to that. And on top of that, there are all these, taxation. Like just to give you an example, that when this the VAT was introduced on air travel, anyone who traveled from say London to Singapore via Bombay, there was a VAT applied on the Bombay to Singapore sector. Now these are things not done because an Indian airport or an Indian carrier has to compete for that business with the likes of Middle East. There is no taxation there. So then you are pushing it's a kind of a reverse discrimination against your airline. But this was done away with, but it really took sort of 4 or 5 years, and this was a long time when there was a competitive disadvantage. The government's own limitation, like when in an hour of crisis, in an hour of crisis, when we come to this situation like bailouts, like what is happening today in the world. The German government decides to put in $10 billion. They have bought equity in their airline, Lufthansa. Only yesterday, Hong Kong administration has announced a $5 billion investment in Cathay Pacific. It's again, they are picking the equity. And so on and so forth. American investments, we know the Singapore, what they did for Singapore Airline by way of subsidizing the salaries and all that is known. So in India, when a crisis like this emerges, where is this bailout for the airline? So this is something which is an issue. We'll come to that later. The business structuring, these countries like which we saw, Singapore or Dubai or Hong Kong, they do the business structuring so smartly. Their government drives it, and they drive it to an extent that there is a cross subsidy element, in the sense that the airport and the airline and the duty free and the ground handling, everything is kind of under the same umbrella, divided into strategic business units. So one subsidizes the other, and that is how. But so we definitely are not in a position to do something like this. The fleet orders, for in the government system for its own airline, how challenging it is. Then on top of that, the immigration rules, because of our security sensitivity. Though I must say that there has been a lot of forward movement in terms of visa on arrival, etc., which has helped tourism, which has helped the cause of tourism. But a lot more needs to be done. I can give you example of places like say Bangkok, or a place like Hong Kong, where they have made it so friendly in order to get your visa for entering the country. So obviously a tourist, if he has a choice, starts looking in that direction. Now, one of the cost elements, how this reverse discrimination towards making the airline in terms of cost the disadvantage. I will just compare this fuel cost. Now, in terms of fuel cost, India actually is a surplus country. We make more ATF and we are exporting ATF. But the pricing of ATF is based on the international price parity of the crude. So based on that, you decide the price. On top of that, the landing cost of the ATF is opaque, because then there are several add-ons like marketing cost, travel cost, this cost, that cost. I think if I remember correctly, there are 7 or 8 add-on elements to the base price, which pushes the cost up. Now, as per the estimate which we had carried out, for some airline, we found that the Gulf carriers, they have a $60 benefit per passenger on the India-Europe route. Just per passenger, only because of the advantage of fuel. Because let us say that we talk of India-Europe, Indian carrier will operate from Delhi to London. So his entire carriage Delhi to London is with the fuel price which is prevalent in India. Whilst the Gulf carrier, when they come pick the passenger from India, they only have to do a short sector like say Delhi to Dubai on the Indian fuel price. Then Dubai to London, it is their own fuel price. So that is how the difference comes. When it comes to USA, it is almost $94. So that is the difference. Now, I would say that we actually work in silos. The government, these public sector, these are public sector government companies. in terms of their total scheme of things, the ATF is minuscule. It is not more than, maybe 2% of the total business that they do. There could be a price rationalization to make Indian carrier competitively not disadvantaged. So, but somehow that has never happened. Naresh Chandra committee report also had some strong recommendations, but these could not be implemented. Now, in a scenario like this, when we do not have our own airline, which is in a position to compete as of now globally, we do not have an airline. Efforts were made and the efforts collapsed. But in terms of our own travel, trade, and business interest, if we do not have a globally competitive airline, we should certainly not promote a globally protected airline. It doesn't help to have a globally protected airline because airline is a fairly global business. It doesn't help the passenger, it doesn't help the economy, it doesn't help the national interest in the long run to have a protectionist policy in a business, particularly like airline. You have to, for your tourism, for your trade, the network, the better network, the better fares, all those are going to be the driving factors. Now, I am of the considered view, and I have always said everywhere that if we are unable to establish a world-class airline, there is no point stopping others who can serve the same interest, maybe better. Now, that brings me to what is happening in the rest of the world. So rest of the world, you see these boundaries are actually gradually going, and European Union was a classic example. They removed all boundaries and created a single sky. So no bilateral, nothing, any airline established inside the European Union has a complete unfettered access all over the European Union to all airports. Now Canada, USA, when Canada, US were doing their own open sky agreement, there was of course a lot of adverse feeling in Canada because the US airlines were so powerful, they were so moneyed. The Canadian carriers were nothing in comparison. But there is evidence on record that Canada benefited immensely out of that agreement. Similarly, Australia realizing its geographical size, they were one of the pioneer nations. They removed all restrictions, and any foreign airline could invest even 100% towards establishing an airline in Australia. And there was this example of Virgin going to Australia and setting up the airline. A very recent case, Qatar is such a small state. It is population-wise in terms of a destination. European Union, they have signed and concluded an open sky agreement with Qatar. Now, these are classic cases where the concept of economic approach towards harnessing the benefit of international air connectivity, that approach is the predominant approach rather than having a narrow approach towards protecting. In the long run, you protect an airline which does not deserve to be protected, first of all. And on the other hand, what happens is that in terms of your network, in terms of passenger, the nation's connectivity suffers, which is actually an infrastructure requirement at the end of the day. So in terms of roadmap, there are many thoughts which can keep coming, but I have just put a few things together, and you will realize that when in terms of India, it is not easy. It is not easy to achieve this kind of a roadmap. So what I feel is that there should be an effort to identify one or two candidates for establishing world-class airline. You have to discuss with one or two candidates, and obviously those candidates have to be those candidates have to be the ones who have a strong network in India, and they can be the candidates who can then commit towards investment, and we are talking of serious investment. Then the growth of fleet and network based on those, there can be a understanding on a roadmap. Obviously, that particular airline should be given a very preferential allocation in terms of slot space at airports, maybe even exclusive terminals, as has happened elsewhere. Now, there are two greenfield projects coming up, the Jewar and Navi Mumbai. These offer greenfield opportunity. So if there is some sort of a serious thought towards promoting our own globally competitive airline, then if this is the time to sit with the airport developer and plan the future growth, and accordingly the entire space planning will have to be done. The fuel, the address cost issues, the government will have to do that. The fuel we have already discussed, import tariffs on even spares and other things which other countries don't have. Other tariffs like this GST on international air travel and all that. All these need to be looked at only from one angle, is to make our own airline competitively not disadvantage. Similarly, to attract transfer traffic, you have to have some friendly policy towards these stopover traffic, who typically want to stay for 2 days, 2 to 3 days. So you have classic case of people coming in and trying to go and see Taj Mahal, visit Taj Mahal. So for all that, we need a framework for facilitation. Multimodal transport linkage is again a very crucial thing if we really have to develop that kind of airline. And as others allow them a bouquet of service like ground handling, duty-free catering, so that their revenues are robust. Even in sort of any given situation, if the airline alone is not able to do very well, there are other businesses can step in. With such airline, you can dovetail then your bilateral growth when keeping fully in confidence and in consultation. The foreign airline investment, which is somewhat unique in India, because generally speaking, nations prefer to first do the bilateral growth through agreements and then come to a foreign airline investment. Because once a foreign airline investment is there, it is like in airline industry we call it a cabotage. It's like a cabotage when the entire your domestic sector is actually available to the foreign airline, and the advantage which a home carrier can have is in a way compromised and diluted. Similarly, as we talked, to stand by in crisis situation, that is important for the government to really step in such crisis situations as other governments have stepped in, because there is a serious investment involved, and if something like COVID has happened, then there is need for government. So I am just sort of coming to the concluding side, and I feel that, and I'm going to read this, that unfortunately the global competitiveness in airline industry is so intense that there are no half answers. Either we back couple of dreamers investors to the hilt, like Singapore, UAE, Germany, US does, or else we continue having some ordinary attempt towards greatness. Failure to compete leads to protectionist demands. A nation of 1.3 billion and growing, 16% of world population, aspiring to become a 5 trillion economy, cannot afford a protectionist policy. If we do have candidates, let's not prevent others from providing world-class air connectivity. And typically for an airline industry, as Mr. Rudy was saying about the from billionaire to millionaire, so typically I would feel that in terms of a globally competitive product, either you compete with the best or sooner or later you will be put to rest. So if we are in a position to promote the best airline, we should really try and go through a kind of a policy prescription and plan it in that manner, or else I do not see this kind of a globally competitive airline which has the ability to attract traffic for transfer and to take care of the entire Indian requirement. I do not foresee something like this coming in a short time. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. R.K. Singh. And it's so professionally presented that, as we say in audio visual, we can see and we can also hear. And the way you explained it, it's wonderful. But towards the end, I wish there was scenario was such that you could be much more optimistic about the future, which generally, as you pointed out, there are quite a few strains at the moment. The roadblocks, maybe we can clear it sooner the better, especially in light of the pandemic that we are facing at the moment. So now I leave the house open for questions, though we are slightly short of time, but we can take a few questions. And even I was saying that the first question has come your way, Mr. Singh. Are you there? Are you listening to me? Awaaz aa rahi hai, bhai sahab?
Yes.
This is from Ekoi Jam, one of the members of PPF. Dear sir, how is it possible for Indian airline or in air services if there are less passenger demand in India?
No, I think, I underlined that the passenger demand from India is a fairly robust demand. So Indian demand it's basically the Indian demand which does not get fulfilled by the Indian carrier, which then has to be fulfilled by other network carriers. And these network carriers are sitting, and we talk, when we talk of a network carrier, we mostly talk these days of the Middle East, Gulf and Singapore and Hong Kong and so on. but actually a lot of USA traffic goes even through the European networked airline, like, maybe it's German airline, Lufthansa, Air France, or British Airways. So it is end of the day, the demand is not in question. The demand is very much there. The demand, in fact, justifies establishment of a great airline inside India, because then the economic benefit shall remain here. But for that to happen, there are too many things have to happen around it, as I explained.
And you have enumerated those things also. Before we move on to our final expert and guest, Air Marshal APS Ahluwalia, Mr. Singh, there's another question that's cropping in my mind, in case you can just briefly touch upon that. You very rightly pointed out the geographical attraction for any airline to be launched from India on a global scale, and which you justifiably presented how the chances of it being successful is great. At the moment, we can count our fingers the present airlines which are operating, like Indigo, SpiceJet, now Vistara has entered. Do you see any of these three to rise to the occasion of being a topmost and best international global airlines, or do you think some other foreign player will come and take the cake? Mr. Singh?
You see, this long haul carriage is a different ball game. It's a short haul and long haul, these are completely two different animals, completely two different ball game. Short haul is definitely concentrated more towards, your regional. You do not have that much of competition coming in from a foreign airline. Of course, there are exceptions made in India. There are these investments and all that. But as you go into those long haul situation, then your money requirement goes up, your whole sort of ability to plan goes up, your vulnerability to downsides, that goes up. So amongst the airline that you mentioned, only one airline has come forward yet to induct wide body, and their first wide body plane has also got inducted, which is the Vistara Airline. They have got first Dreamliner, which has arrived, and I believe that they're looking at either a London service or a Tokyo service to begin with. But for this COVID crisis, maybe they would have sort of opened sales also. They have not. So there is an attempt. I would say there is an attempt, and if there is an attempt, we should actually seriously back that attempt, so that again it does not come down. And end of the day, we have Singapore Airlines, as also we have the Tatas. So both put together, there is a fairly strong muscle behind it. The only problem is, which I openly feel that that is something which is an issue, is that will Singapore Airline allow an Indian carrier to develop based in India, which in a way compromises on Singapore being a hub of India. So that's a question mark. As far as going west is concerned, I see no issues, but going east, there could be an issue.
But there's a news of Indigo picking up some stakes in one of the international airlines. So is it they're thinking in terms of moving in that direction?
No, these are speculative things. These things cannot be talked, on the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we actually touched upon quite a lot of issues, and the professional thing, at the cost of repetition, I would really thank you, Mr. Singh, that you presented your thoughts not only with clarity, but also with an very appropriate and attractive presentation. So thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for participating and for the questions that came up your way. Now that brings us to the final and maybe the senior most expert in today's webinar, Air Marshal retired APS Ahluwalia. Before I request you to take the forum, a very brief introduction, because we are actually running a bit short of time, but no problem. Even if it is like short and sweet, it will be much more useful, I'm sure. But a brief introduction about, actually it's such a wide experience that he has had. Air Marshal has spent around 4 decades, yes, 40 years in the Indian Air Force in the fighter stream. He has flown a multitude of fighters, transport and helicopters. He has vast experience in handling civil aviation and Air Force control of airspace matters. The Air Marshal is a former Chief of Western Air Command, where he was responsible for control of the largest volume of airspace in India. Air Marshal APS Ahluwalia, PVSM, AVSM and BAR, VM and VSM, you think of the awards that we bestowed upon him. And so he is the most appropriate of the experts to talk about the topic that has been requested by the PPF for him to speak on. And the topic is, which Air Marshal Ahluwalia will be speaking, is flexible use of airspace, the way forward. And I'm having a smile when I'm talking about this flexible use of airspace, the way forward, because Mr. Rudy had pointed out a very interesting fact that half of the present pilots were former Air Force pilots. And so they have to change according to the service that they were providing, whether it be Air Force or civil aviation. So over to you, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, the topic being flexible use of airspace, the way forward. Air Marshal Ahluwalia, please.
Thank you, thank you. It's indeed a pleasure to be the last speaker, because I think most of you must be saturated by now, listening to all the academic inputs that you got from such renowned speakers. And in fact, that is the problem with our country. That is the problem with all our institutions, that you do not have actual professionals who are running civil aviation in this country. For instance, you take the DGCA. I don't think you got very many professionals over there, and they believe that they are there to monitor you and not to facilitate.
Exactly.
And when it comes to formulating policies, then you've got a whole lot of bureaucracies which probably don't know A to Z about aviation, but are laying down the rules, regulations, and deciding on the policy ahead. And everybody's talking about the road ahead, the road ahead. And I think this road ahead phraseology must have started in 1947. And 1947, where you put all these Nawabs and kings and emperors together into one country. And at that time, it was essential that the government actually ran the show, ran just about everything, including that Lembretta that you had, and that old ambassador had to be with concurrence of the government. But over the years, we have not changed. We should have dropped that government clause in the 60s, and latest by the 70s, and got on to commercialization. And with commercialization, you need people who are qualified to run a commercial organization coming into the show. The same thing has happened with civil aviation. And when you are competing against so many others in the world who are very professional, then I think you're going to lose out. And as all the previous speakers mentioned, the whole story is money, money, money. And if you cannot make any money, you cannot run an airline. And you cannot have the right kind of infrastructure, the logistics, and the communication that airlines are supposed to provide in a very strategic manner to the country and its people. So therefore, we come to my subject, and that is Flexi Airspace. What does Flexi Airspace mean? It means that, you know, whatever airspace we've got, it can be shared. It can be shared by whosoever wants to fly within this airspace. At the moment, we find that the Air Force has got a lot of volume of airspace, and the civil aviation has always wanted more, obviously, because today, just like the former minister mentioned, you've got about 700 odd aircraft flying at any one time. So therefore, the airways get saturated. You need more volume. You need more airspace. You need more airspace for these aircraft to go from place A to place B. So what happens? Basically, commercial airlines, because of once again, money, 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 economy of effort, economy of fuel, economy of time, they would want to go from place A to place B directly. Just draw a straight line and go from there. And rightly so, that's the way it should be. However, as far as the Air Force is concerned, unlike in the commercial space segment, the airways, you've got a very little vertical spacing. You don't need much because you're going to fly straight and level. You're not going to be doing maneuvers. In the Air Force, what you need is a lot of space to maneuver. I take 8 aircraft with me. I've got to teach them, combat. I've got to teach them how to intercept. I've got to teach them how to avoid detection from the radars, etc., etc. So I occupy at any one time for the kind of exercises that we have, which brings you to the optimal level of operational efficiency. I'll operate between 500 feet to 40,000 feet, maybe even more. So therefore, there is a contradiction here between the requirement of civil aviation and the requirement of the Air Force. It is easy to sort it out if you have the right kind of people on both sides. You've got to get rid of the mindset. You've got to see what others are doing in the world. You take Europe. I mean, I've flown over there in fighters, the Mirage 2000, and I can tell you that nobody tells you that you have a sector or a segment or anything like that. You are controlled by the ground radar. You're only told you get airborne, you turn right or turn left, whatever it is, climb to so-and-so height, and contact this radar. In other words, the radar will control your entire movement. And in between your maneuvers, you'll be told, please stop. Why? Because a civil airliner will be crossing that airspace and you have no choice but to stop because you are utilizing part of the airway that is already designated. The same thing applies back home here, that we can avoid. I mean, if we have good control, firstly, not only in terms of radars to be able to detect, but very importantly, as to who's going to control. If you talk to the Airports Authority, they've got a different view. You talk to the Air Force, they've got a different view. You've got to have the right decision makers who just say, all you zombies, this is what we got to do, and let's get on with it. For instance, if you're flying from Mumbai to Bangalore, and you've got Pune in between, which is a fairly big Air Force base, you've got to deviate by 100 kilometers. So you can imagine the kind of fuel that is being wasted for you to be able to do this. However, if we had enough radar cover, then you will be able to actually guide the aircraft, whether it's civil aviation or Air Force, for their requirements, you can easily handle it. And today, I must tell you that the Air Force, with its IACCS, which is a command and control system of radars networked throughout the country. So the Air Force can control it. The Air Force has enough secondary radars to control the entire peninsula, which means that your IFF will be available to you. And IFF means, you're always giving a ping, 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 which means a sound telling the fellow on the ground that I am right here at this point, at this location, at this altitude. So what do we do? What do we need to do? That's what we need to do. Clear the airways. Clear all of them, no deviation, go from place A to place B, the shortest possible route. However, to be able to do that, control, of course, after you go beyond the aerodrome control zone, must be with the Air Force. Why? Because they've got the wherewithal, the infrastructure, and the radars to see who's flying where. And if that is done, then you can fly the shortest possible way as far as civil aviation is concerned. And you don't need to have dedicated volume of airspace for every base. Whether it is Jalandhar, Adhampur, Halwara, whether it is Pathankot, Chandigarh, down to Pune, down to Jaisalmer, etc., etc. You can't have dedicated space only for you, because if you then draw a map, you'll have no space for anybody else to fly. So to be able to overcome that, this is the solution, and this is the way ahead. But the first thing we got to do is get rid of that mindset. Have professionals who mean business, who are going to do it. The Nike ad, it says, just do it. That's the way to do it. And if we follow these few simple guidelines, then I think it is very possible. And I think civil aviation would be much happier, because at least 10%, if not more, of the fuel consumption will be saved. Definitely, maybe even more than that. And not only that, it will be able, because tomorrow you want to open so many more. You had RK talking about so many other greenfield airfields, brown airfields, pink airfields, all kinds of airfields that are going to come in. Now, how are you going to manage that? You still will have a problem. And if I want to go from here to Chandigarh, and actually it should take me half an hour or 45 minutes, but at the end of the day, I'm taking 1 hour, 15 minutes. So I'm losing a lot of time. I'm losing money. I'm losing patience. And the same thing applies to international carriers. Because I'm sure all of you have been flying, and you know, when you're getting home or getting to your destination and the fellow goes round and round and round and round, that you get very upset because you want to land, you want to get on with your work. So very essential that we have to have a flexi use of airspace, which will be shared by civil aviation and the Air Force. To be able to do that, you must have very clear identification as to who's going to control the airspace. Because please remember, flight safety is most crucial. You all are aware of the aircraft accident that happened between Saudi and one of the Kazakhstan aircraft, where all about 300-400 people died because, you know, the airway was, the route out and the route in was on the same radial. And somebody made an error in terms of flying at that particular height. And so many people lost their lives. So aviation priority is for safety. And safety, flight safety, is very, very crucial because every life matters. And if we have too many accidents, then we've got another problem there. So to cut the long story short, because I think everybody is already saturated, Flexi Airspace is the way ahead, even if I might repeat the phraseology, and it must be done, and it must be done as of yesterday. It needs the mindset to be broken. It needs both sides, civil aviation as well as the Air Force, especially those who know the business, those who are decision makers and who have the right kind of attitude to be able to find solutions, and you'll have your solutions. I look forward to any kind of questions that you have. I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, first of all, let me assure you, sir, we are absolutely not saturated, especially because your first-hand experience about maneuvering those aircrafts and managing those flexi airspace, it was very interesting. Let me assure you. So you can go ahead and add a few more things if you want to, please.
Thank you. I think everybody must be waiting for lunch. You go ahead, ask me any kind of questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Please. And I'm also waiting for the questions to keep coming in. And as and when they keep coming in, I'll pass it on to you. And meanwhile, is Mr. R.K. Singh still there? Mr. Singh, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, I wish I could see you too. Yeah, now I can see you. Actually, the reason why I requested you to come online is when Air Marshal Ahluwalia had started speaking, there was a input that came to me, and that was regarding a comment about you. It was not exactly a question, but Mr. Sanjay Sinha from PPF had a comment about your presentation. And Sanjay Sinha says, brilliant talk by Sri R.K. Singh. So I had just to communicate that to you.
Thank you.
That it was really very nice, nicely appreciated. Thank you very much once again. And I
have sent a question for Air Marshal Ahluwalia. Have you got it? Can you send it to him?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it'll just be coming my way very soon. Yeah, it has reached me. So I'll just present your question to Mr. Ahluwalia. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, sure, loud and clear.
Thank you so much. So the question, as Mr. Singh told you, is coming your way from him. Eurocontrol has a joint control mechanism, and I'm a witness to it, Mr. Singh says. Why can't it happen in India? Marshal Ahluwalia.
Yes, because the thinking is still primitive. The institution has not graduated for efficiency. What we have here is we have a local cell with every air traffic control representing the Air Force guys. Now, the air defense clearance is given by them. Now, this is prehistoric methodology that whichever aircraft is going from Delhi to Bombay, it's got its route clearance. It needs an air defense clearance also. So this Air Force person sitting over there he clears it, and that's the way they go. But in Europe, just like RK mentioned, it is a sharing of airspace once again, because it's so small. You fly in France, you don't have the privilege of using a large volume of airspace and doing whatever you want. And please remember, in the Air Force, when I go to practice interceptions, especially, I have to have a volume of airspace which is actually extending up to maybe 100 kilometers, because I want to see how my radar works. I want to see where this guy is coming from, what is the way he's going to maneuver, and what am I going to do, etc., etc. So I'm using from 500 feet, if not below, right up to 40,000 plus feet. So what you need to do is, once again, if you have the aircraft in the sky on your scope, which means if you know where the position of every single aircraft is, whether it is fighters, transport, helicopters, civil aviation, etc., etc. If you've got it on your scope and you've got an integrated command and control system that the Air Force has got. Because today, sitting in Delhi, I will know what is flying in Trivandrum. I have integrated the civil aviation radars also. So there is absolutely no reason why we just don't make an SOP which will give enough control to those who can and who have the resources, like in this case, the Air Force, and you'll have no difficulty whatsoever in going from place A to place B the shortest possible way. And in fact, you can do better than Europe.
Yeah, I like the way Air Marshal Ahluwalia, you are so forthcoming and so frank. Very few senior government officials, even after retiring, would have the courage to call up spade a spade. So we are really lucky to have your views in such forthcoming manner. And I really hope that whatever you are thinking materializes in the interest of the country sooner than the later. Thank you so much, sir. And now, as Air Marshal Ahluwalia is also reminding us about the lunch, but before we actually move towards wrapping up this webinar, let me put it on record. It's been really very helpful, very useful, and we are all of us who had joined really had privilege of having the best of the experts in the field of civil aviation in terms of PPF trying to find its way out in terms of the future way forward, especially in light of the existing pandemic. But before we actually wrap up this show, I would request the president of PPF, Mr. Halder, to please say a few words and his concluding remarks, please. Mr. Halder.
Disconnect the mute.
Okay.
All then Mr. Singh as well as Mr. R.K. Singh, and then last but not least, Air Marshal Ahluwalia. Actually, this has been a journey of lot of information came our way, and very convincingly at that. And in fact, I did pose a question to Mr. Paul about where in the public domain can we get some of the data that he mentions, because it's very fascinating that this kind of a thing is happening. And we are not really taking it up in a manner in which it should make a much greater sense. And Rajesh ji, I must congratulate you. You have made a very forceful and convincing presentation. And in your case also, I have sent a message to your number in which I wanted to know that some of these can also be converted into, and in that PPF, if you have any role, will play, into a citizens charter. That it is not to be pushed forward as a sectoral this thing, but you know it's in the interest of the nation. And if we have any vision for the nation for this century, then we need to move forward. So can we put some of these in a citizens charter basis and start a kind of discussion, this thing? That may not have an immediate impact, but this does inform the larger body of it. So please do consider, we will be very happy to play. And Mr. Ahluwalia, you made presentation, we must congratulate you of a very tough topic in a very simple term. Because you have referred to the biases or mindset, rather, you said. Those mindsets are actually coming in the way. Those mindsets are decades old. But what do we do to change? That probably is the aspect that we have to concentrate on that. But
सागर को ले लेता हूँ, GSS को तो support करना पड़ेगा.
All the speakers, I must congratulate. This has been personally for me a journey of learning, and I'm sure I speak for other.
मेरी सुबह प्रिया से बात हुई थी. I did take her, give her a heads up, and I spoke to her.
I'm sorry, Mr. Halder, there is some audio coming.
But मैं
This is Mr.
पास नहीं
Malhotra.
तो मैं digital से करा दूंगी. But सर एक काम और करता हूँ, मैं किसी embassy से सलाह ले लेता हूँ कि
there is some audio issue.
ठीक है सर.
There is some audio coming.
ठीक है सर.
There is some audio coming.
Let me check. Pooja, can you help us?
Now,
वो तो मेरे भी दोस्त
Yes,
से
sir.
बात करता हूँ.
I'm doing it, sir.
So mute कर
We
दीजिए.
can identify whose audio is.
It should be muted. Yeah, it should be.
We can just.
Right, sir.
हो गया sir. हो गया.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Halder. Yeah.
No.
ठीक है सर.
But I just wanted to say that, repeat my saying that.
No, it's not happened. Sorry, it's not happened. You have to mute.
नहीं Monday नहीं सर, ये तो process.
Mute Mr. Malhotra.
Mr. Rajan Malhotra.
Yeah.
Okay, I've just unmuted him. Okay, yeah.
We have a clear space.
Yeah.
We were talking about this space and its control.
I took the control of the of clearing the airspace of yours.
This is what Air Marshal was saying. Now, I just wanted to come back to that.
बीच में अभी आपका कोई conversation चल रहा था ना.
We are grateful to all the speakers. It's been a learning experience, but we need to move forward from here and take a trajectory at various levels to pursue the idea. I mean, I personally feel very convinced of some of the arguments that were made this week. Thank you very much.
In case Air Marshal Ahluwalia is there still? Air Marshal Ahluwalia, can you hear me? Yeah, I think I'll have to clear his airspace also.
Yeah, sorry, my.
No, he's there, but he's not audible.
You have to unmute.
Okay.
Air Marshal Saab, you have to unmute.
I've done that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, now we can hear you. So before I could say the final bye-bye, just another question is coming. So if, with the permission of Mr. Halder, can we accommodate that one question very quickly?
Sure.
This question is coming to you, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, from one of the persons of PPF, Jam. And the question is, I quote, "Dear sir, who could be the best feasible controller in context of Indian Flexi Space? What is your suggestion?"
I couldn't get the question because controlling can be civil aviation, it can be Air Force.
Exactly.
But in terms of controlling traffic near the aerodrome, must be with Airports Authority controllers. But when it is coming to controlling airspace, away from the place that you have taken off to landing and in between, that will have to be, I think, done by the Air Force controller by virtue of the fact that he has the facility, the resources in terms of radars to be able to know and get an air situation picture sitting on a table like I am on a console. So he's the best person suited to control the aircraft in that airspace.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm sure Mr. KM Singh sir has something to add. So we are just clearing your airspace, sir. Yeah. Pooja, can you help unmute Mr. KM Singh?
So I'm trying, but same time वो भी try कर रहे हैं तो problem हो रही है.
अच्छा अच्छा.
He's there.
हाँ अब कर लीजिए. अब now he is not trying. हाँ हो गया. Mr. Singh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
I must compliment all the 4 speakers. Brilliant presentations. Outcome much better than what we expected. The roadmap, well, and the one point that came out was at the higher echelon in our country, the mindset has to be changed. And if that is changed, I think the sky is the limit for the aviation sector also. We have to be internationally competitive. We have the potential. Today it is number third. I was shown the presentation. Probably, if there's a positive approach, what was Naresh Chandra Committee report, how the things moved in 2003 to 2008, and if it is carried forward, we have the opportunity, probably from number 3, we can go to number 1 also. But the attitude of protectionism of the PSUs has to go. There has to be objectivity at the higher echelon, that whoever is the best will go forward. We have to be internationally competitive. And if that is done, the country will be benefited not only the civil aviation, but in so many ways. Huge tourism, lot of foreign exchange. So today we have a huge opportunity, and let me thank everyone that we have so many good suggestions that I am confident in the report PPF will be able to come up with strong recommendations, and then we'll follow it up. But thank you once again, all the speakers, for brilliant presentations.
Thank you very much, sir. So that brings us to the end of it. And with the permission of the head of PPF, Mr. Haldak, can we just call it a day and move for lunch?
Sure.
Okay, so happy lunch for all of us. At our respective places, yes, sir. Thank you so much.
We can only offer a virtual lunch.
Virtual lunch.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. It was wonderful being with you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.